Hello, welcome and apologies for that classic YouTube title that I've put on this video, but don't click away yet because I'm going to cover the 5 things I hate about the Audi R8, but I'm not going to cover any of the usual nonsense. Things like the cup holders aren't very good, or I'm unhappy with the fuel economy I get out of my 4.2 litre V8. No, we're not going to mention any of that stuff. Instead, I'm going to do what I can here to give you a real good, insightful view of the less desirable areas of this car. Now, before we get into that, I want to add also that I am a self-confessed fanboy of the R8. I love them. I've owned multiple and I've done tens of thousands of miles over the years behind the wheel of them. So I know them really well, I know their shortcomings really well, and that is what I'm going to try and convey in this video. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to mention is the steering feel. Now, it's not to say that it's bad, but in the market that the R8 is in, it needs to be good to keep up with the competition. It just has a sort of inherent vagueness. It's not quite got the accuracy that you would expect from a car of this era in that market with a hydraulic rack. Now, obviously, there are reasons behind that. It wasn't just compromised for no reason or to make the car intentionally worse. First of all, it was to do with budget. The team behind the development of the R8 originally said they wanted to spend a bit more time, put a bit more effort into the development of that steering feel and placement. However, doing so would have blown the budget and the R8 wouldn't have been the bargain that it was. So something else to consider is its quattro. That means we've got a big heavy diff sat up front, we've got a set of drive shafts, we've got a prop shaft running the length of the car. Now, none of this bodes good for steering feel, and it certainly gives the cars that are rear driven a little bit of a leg up in this department against the R8. So the next thing I want to mention is a bit predictable, but I can't make a 5 things I hate about the Audi R8 and not mention it, and that is the mag ride suspension. So this car still has the original suspension on it. I say original, a couple of them have been replaced, even though the car is very low mileage. Now, the problem with these isn't the operation, they're actually very, very good. It's the reliability and durability of them is dismal. So it's not a case of if the mag ride suspension on your car is going to fail, it's a question of when is it going to fail, which is a real shame because what a clever system it is. You've got these sealed struts which at the push of a button can dramatically alter the damping performance of the car. It's absolutely brilliant, just a shame they don't last. Now, if you encounter this problem, thankfully there are a few different things you can do to remedy it. There is a company who will refurb these shocks, ship them back to you, and they'll be as good as new. But therein lies the problem. New isn't really good enough because they're probably, in fact, they're definitely going to fail again. So it leads you down the route of coilovers. So there are a lot of decent coilover systems out there. BC Racing is a really good example of a reasonably cheap yet good quality setup. But just be careful with the spring rates that come on some of these coilovers. For example, BC Racing, they've got it mixed up. They've got a harsher spring rate to the rear than they do the front, which is the entirely wrong setup. No race car or fast road cars ever set up like that. So BC Racing, if you are watching, switch those springs around and then send me a set and I'll test them out for you. Point number 3 is something that just bugs me. Even though it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme, this just gets to me. Now, you're either going to be totally with me when I explain this, or you're going to think, he's a bit of a weirdo. Drop in the comments below which camp you're part of, don't be shy. What it is, as we start taking a look at some of the details on the R8, you start to learn it's a bit of an aerodynamic nightmare. There's just all these little parts where air can get trapped and not flow very freely. If we compare that to something like a Nissan GT-R, which looks like it's been born in a wind tunnel, you can just tell that thing has got a super low drag coefficient, it's going to be super efficient through the air. In comparison, the R8 looks like a bit of a turbulence nightmare. Now to me, this is one of the points that represent an inherent challenge that the A8 has always had, and that is it's constantly sitting on the fence between favouring the aesthetic component of the car, a really nice, sexy looking sports car or supercar, versus the outright functionality that something like a GTR would offer. Interesting point nonetheless. So my point number 4, I'm not going to labour on too much because it is well documented, but I just feel I couldn't put together the 5 things I hate without mentioning this. And that is the V8 A8 exhaust note from factory. It was way too quiet, it just sounded rubbish, wasn't good at all. But thankfully, remedying it was pretty easy. There's a number of aftermarket examples to choose from, and they do sound very good. If you want to check out the exhaust I've got on this car, I'll add a link to the video in the description of us fitting it and firing it up for the first time. But don't click it yet, finish this video first. So for my final point, point 5, I've chosen the underappreciatedness of the V8 in the A8. So it's not a fault of the car itself, but it is a stigma that attaches to these cars. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that the V10 isn't a fantastic engine. However, that doesn't mean that the V8 should be completely overlooked. I've driven both and there are pros and cons to each. Yes, the V10 has more power and it is going to be quicker in a straight line. However, dare I say it, the V8 may even be the sweeter handling car, being a little bit less weight and slightly more balanced. And also, this is personal preference, but I think at lower RPMs, I actually prefer the noise that the V8 with an aftermarket exhaust makes. And in terms of straight line performance, don't be deceived. This little V8 will propel this car well enough that it'll keep up with most things from its own era. Certainly pre-LP Gallardos, Ferrari 360s, not a problem. You will be right on their heels. Final point, and it's a question for you guys. Are you considering buying an A8 or are you just here out of morbid curiosity? Either's fine, but if it is the former and you're looking to buy one, be sure to click this link in the top right hand corner now, where I'll take you through all the points you need to check to make sure you get a good car. Buy a bad one and it can be very expensive indeed. But for now, if you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a like and consider subscribing.